About 4 years ago, I was on the cusp of giving up bell ringing altogether, but a complete chance meeting with a very good friend of mine, Mr. Philip Ramsbottom, happened, and Philip suggested that I give St. Martin's Guild a try. So here I am. And this presentation really came about as a result of a couple of weeks ago, I put together a few lines on some basic tower security ideas and sent it through to Arthur. Arthur immediately asked if I could do a presentation concerning the tower security. It wasn't what I was expecting, but I've had a go. And so hopefully it'll go okay. Basic tower security. And if it doesn't go well, you just need to blame Phil. He's the one that got me into St. Martin's Guild in the first place. So we're going to have a look at security for people, for buildings, and also have a quick reminder of the government message on run, hide, tell and counter-terrorism, and remind ourselves of ways that we can keep ourselves safe in the unlikely event of something that serious happening. We're also going to look quite topically at risk assessments, clearly with COVID-19 and us beginning to think about how we can return to bell ringing. They've become much more relevant. Indeed, employers are required to complete risk assessments prior to people like going into shops or into churches. And although we're not employees of those places, we are working or volunteering in places that are places of employment. So the legislation on health and safety still applies to us. So the first thing we're going to have a look at is fire. Now, I'm no firefighter, but this is a scene that none of us want to see. This is a church, in this case Notre Dame, on fire. And it clearly goes to show that fire can happen anywhere. Notre Dame is a place that had staff on premises 24/7, a sophisticated and modern fire detection system and alarm system, but still this catastrophic fire happened. Now we know that the bells in this particular case were just saved, but effectively the building has been destroyed. Fire protection is clearly vital for both people and buildings. And there's a couple of key questions that we as bell ringers should, I think, ask ourselves concerning fire protection. First of all, is there a fire alarm in the ringing room? And if there is, can you hear the fire alarm while you're ringing the bells? And it seems to me there's really only one logical way to test that, and that's to arrange, perhaps with the church wardens or the church admin teams, a test of that system, perhaps during a practice night. Ring the bells, have the fire alarm tested, and can you actually hear it? If there isn't a fire alarm in the ringing room, is there some other system in place or a process that allows the ringers to be alerted of a fire? And are the other teams in the building, such as church wardens or sides people, are they familiar with the systems? And it might be that there's a telephone system that somebody uses to pick up an internal phone system, or even a mobile phone system. Does the signal work in the belfry or in the ringing room? It's also worth making sure that the teams downstairs are familiar with those telephone or internal bell pull systems. There are various types of ways that it can be achieved. And I think finally on fire alarms, is the system tested regularly? Now it's probably out of the hands of bell ringers, but as occupants probably of one of the more difficult to access places in the building, it's certainly in our interests to know that the fire alarm system is working properly. And if clearly during ringing or maintenance sessions, you notice that a part of the fire alarm system looks like it needs repair, then clearly you need to report that to the admin teams. And it may be worth speaking to them to arrange a fire safety check. It's something that we have done recently at Birmingham Cathedral. And then the emergency exit from the ringing room. You need to practice this and time it. It might take longer than you think to get people from the ringing room out and to the fire assembly point. It's definitely worth practicing. It's something that we've practiced in various towers that I've rung at, and it does take quite a few more minutes than you think, really, to get everybody down the staircase, out of the door, and safely assembled at the fire assembly point. So 3 takeaways, really, from that little section. The fire alarm system, you need to test it, make sure it works. The emergency exit from the ringing room, it may be that you need to use the emergency exit procedure for something other than fire, so it's definitely worth practicing. It could even be something like a building collapse or a partial building collapse, then still you would need to evacuate the building. And finally, the fire assembly point, which all places should have appointed, certainly all churches should have appointed. Generally, they are somewhere fairly obvious and they're easy to remember. So at Birmingham, you could, for example, use the statue outside or a particular gateway. In Lichfield, there's a flagpole that everyone knows where that is, and that's a safe distance from the main building. So very quick summary of fire procedures there. And I'm sure Claire will shout up if there's anything in the chat box that we need to have a look at.
Right, so there's nothing in the chat box at the moment, but perhaps if you unshare briefly, and if anybody has a question, they could wave, and then we can, so click unshare, John, should be at the top somewhere. That's it. So if anybody, there's nothing in the chat box at the moment, but if anybody does have a question, perhaps they can raise a hand or wave at us. So, we've got from Steve Askew, how about emergency lighting? Do you have any? I'm
no electrician, but I'm certainly aware that places of employment should have, and entertainment should have, emergency lighting. Definitely something worth checking. All churches will have appointed and approved electricians, and if it's a concern around the electrical system, then definitely that's something to raise with them.
Yes,
again, that needs to be tested to make sure that works.
And Alison has this is Alison Hodge, who's a tower steward. No, you're the introduce yourself, please, Alison, from the Central Council. Are you unmuted?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks very much indeed. And for those that don't know me, I'm not actually a member of the St Martin's Guild, so I was invited, I believe, to come along today. Claire, I hope that's okay.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm the work group leader for the Central Council's work group that deals with this sort of topic. And it's very topical. We're just updating all the information on the council website, so that's a plug for that coming along shortly. But a specific point related to what Jonathan said, I totally agree with what he's been saying. There's just one point, of course, that as ringers, we're often in churches when they are otherwise completely locked up, completely isolated, nobody else about. So fire procedures that may work admirably when there's church wardens, sextons, or other helpers in the church during working hours, and it may even be evenings in some bigger churches, but a lot of rural churches, not in, say, the centre of Birmingham and such like, will be completely deserted when ringers are there. So any evacuation procedures and alarms must function when there's no, for example, if there's no electric alarm and it's a voice system, whose voice will that be if there's nobody else in the church but ringers?
So yes, well, thank you, Alison. And I guess there'll also be considerations about things like lone worker policies as well that the church might have, that that ringers might need to be aware of, especially if you're going up to do maintenance, which I'm sure, which we know we shouldn't be doing on our own. However, there are some things that can mitigate that. Anyway, so in the chat box, we've got a welcome to Alison from Stephanie. But Margaret Burling has asked, should we think about alternative exits should the usual means be unavailable?
Yes, definitely. We'll come on to that in a bit. That's definitely on the list.
Okay, so I think if nobody else has got any questions, we'll go back to the presentation. Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay. Right, so fire alarm, testing, practice the exit, and know where your assembly point is. So we're going to move on and think about doors. Now, the doors to the tower, particularly it seems to me external doors are really, really important. They are the first line of defense against intruders. They protect the building and the bells when the tower is unoccupied. And sometimes, usually during peel or quarter peel attempts, they protect the ringers as well. And there's another significant role around tower doors, which we'll come on to in a little while. Tower doors external to the church, these are really important. But also, you need to remember that there are church buildings with sophisticated alarm systems on the rest of the building, but nothing on the tower door, the staircase, or the ringing room. And that's definitely worth review with churches, because often, as we all know, the rest of the building or parts of the building, like the roof space or triforiums, can be accessed from the tower. So it's important that security is maintained on all aspects of the building and entrances, and particular tower doorways. So when I was thinking about preparing this, when I was stunned into it by Arthur, I took a walk to the 3 churches near to me that all have rings of bells, and they all happen to have external doors. And this one is St. Michael's in Lichfield. There are 6 bells, and it's quite a good example. The doorway is well lit. It's got its own dedicated light above the door and also a street lamp next to it. So it's well lit. When approaching this doorway during the hours of darkness, you would be able to see who or what was around you. And that's probably more relevant to the winter time than now, but nevertheless, it stands. The door seems quite secure. It looks like there are 3 mortise type locks. One at the top there, one at the bottom, and the one in the middle even has a bell-shaped surround to it. I gave this door a push at the top and a push at the bottom, and it was solid, firm to the touch. So that's a good example of a church doorway to a ringing room. I walked down the hill into this piece of Victorian vandalism, which is St. Mary's in Lichfield. There are 8 bells there, and it appears much less secure. There's a hole in the door just here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Just nod, Claire, if you can see my, yeah, thank you. There's a hole there where a mortise type lock was once fitted, and it's just, you can poke your finger in now, there's nothing there. And it has a very old Yale type lock there, which is so old it's been painted over at some point. And that's the only lock on that door. No dedicated street light. But as you would expect, the street lights in the city, they're mounted quite high up. There's one there and one just there. They do provide quite good lighting in the darkness. And this door, if you push it at the top or at the bottom here, it moved quite freely. And it didn't feel to me like it would take a lot of stress to get that door open. And this is quite a good or a bad example really as well. This doorway gives access to this turret, this stairway turret, into the ringing room, which is on this level here. And from there you can get into the rest of the building. That's now no longer a church. It is in fact the city library, exhibition and performance area. And I think there are plans to put a treasury in there as well. So that definitely needs review. I took a little walk along Dam Street to this place. You may recognise 10 bells at Lichfield Cathedral, protected by one door, this one here. It's got its own dedicated light, so that's good, particularly in view of these steps here, which are completely dark at night time without that light, and a dedicated movement sensor, which is a good thing. There's another light here as well. It's an architecturally approved lamp. It doesn't show out as a lamp. It's specifically to light steps on buildings of architectural interest without it looking like a modern fitment. It's almost invisible from where we're sitting. And that provides a good light across the top of the stairs. But the door only has one lock there. Now it's quite a solid lock, but there is only one lock. And those that know the tower, it's this southwest tower where the bells are in this level here, and the doorway is just tucked around the corner on the south side of the cathedral, and it goes up into the ringing room, which is at this level here. And from there, you can get into the rest of the building, externally along the nave roof, internally along the nave triforium, and really probably this door and the lack of alarm system on it needs review. The rest of the building has a very sophisticated alarm system, but the stairway in the ringing room has nothing at all. Thinking about doors, one thing that I've done at St Martin's during lockdown is to commence a key register. It's important that the officers of the tower know who holds keys to the tower. It's just basic good security practice. Tracking keys and recovering them when necessary, for example, if a ringer moves away or stops ringing, is really important to keep trace of who has access to the tower. So 3 little points to take away from that, I think, are establish a key register, check the lighting around the doorways, check physical security of the door, especially if your tower has an external doorway. And I was thinking this morning about, well, what about towers like Moseley that don't have an external doorway? They are ground floor rings. And there are other ways that you can protect the bells. There will be a door up to the bells, probably from the ringing room. Well, make sure that door has a good lock on it to protect the assets of the church, the bells. And the ropes can be secured by making sure that they're on a spider, which hoists the rope well up out of reach. And the bottom end of that spider cord, make sure that's secured behind a good lock, a cabinet, and that provides a level of protection to the ropes to keep people safe that perhaps don't understand how bells work and how dangerous they can be. And also the lock on the door to the staircase to the tower provides that extra layer of safety. And obviously, if you're not enjoying this, blame Phil. So we're going to move on a little bit then and have some useful reminders about counter-terrorism, the run, hide, tell message. And this next section is not designed to frighten anyone. It's really just a reminder, if counter-terrorism isn't in the news, it's not gone away.
Jonathan, just a question just suddenly popped into the chat box about the last section. So Adam has asked, what's your view about locking doors when we're ringing, even on practice nights?
Yeah, clearly that's got pluses and minuses, and traditionally we don't, because, most towers don't, because we like to allow access to our towers for visiting ringers who may not be aware of a particular start time. But some areas they do. You have to be there at a point to assemble, enter the tower, and then lock the door behind, and that's particularly the case in cities. And I remember one example at Canterbury where we had to be there at a time. We are given access, and then the doors are locked behind us because the tower is accessed through the cathedral, and that's locked behind, and everybody knows that. So I think each tower has its own requirements, and it's important to recognise that each place is different.
Thank you, Claire. I'm going to go now.
That's fine, Susan.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay. So this is the rather chilling picture of the Tunisian beach gunman in 2015, so just 5 years ago. The run, hide, tell message is still relevant. It's really important. And run is always a better option than attempting to surrender or negotiate. There is no negotiating with a terrorist. And it's been observed, and it's quite sobering really, that there's no such thing as a hostage in a terrorist situation. They are victims waiting to die. A terrorist will always look for opportunities to maximize publicity and maximize access to the numbers of victims. The good news is, though, that there are things we can do to keep ourselves safe. Now, this is a map of the Tunisian beach gunman's route, put together, I think, by the BBC on this occasion, but nevertheless, it's been gathered by Security Services information. It shows that the attack was well planned and determined. 30 British people died in this attack, but it's important to remember that 2 people survived. They were on the beach somewhere around here where the little tag says 11:50. People that were on the beach heard these first shots, and it was a British couple who had recently had the run, hide, tell training at work. And so they ran from the beach into their hotel, which is on this complex here. And they ran into the foyer of the hotel because they were running away from the sounds of the shots on the beach there. But they recognized pretty much straight away that the foyer was also crowded with people. And that in itself would have presented quite an attractive terrorist target. So they realized that and decided to go to their room to hide. They also encouraged those that were standing around them to do the same, to go to their rooms to hide. But they didn't, importantly, wait around for them to do that. They told them and then went, and that was exactly the right thing to do. The couple went to their room and hid, and they remained there for several hours. While they were in their room, they were able to tell. They phoned their colleagues at work in the UK to tell them what was happening. The colleagues in the UK were able to look at the news and relay to the people hiding what was happening, and also pass the information on to the Tunisian police service. They stayed there hiding for several hours and emerged completely unscathed. So the run, hide, tell message saved this couple while they were on holiday, when so many other people died. So I'm going to look at what can we do? That sounds so terrible that surely there's nothing we can do to protect ourselves. Well, that's not correct. And here are some essential pieces of counter-terrorism equipment. The first thing is a pair of trainers. Now, Phil tells me it's much easier to run in a pair of trainers than it is in a pair of high heels. So I know people in London who commute in trainers and carry their office shoes in their bags, their rucksacks or their handbags, simply because they can run in trainers. And it's probably, I would guess, much easier to maneuver yourself around the tube system in a pair of trainers than it is in a pair of office heels. But I'll take advice from Phil on that one. And a door wedge. Now you're going to say, what on earth can a door wedge do? But actually it's quite a good piece of equipment, this, because if you're hiding in a room and it doesn't have a lock on the door, this door wedge will do it. Any bad guys that come and try the door, bear in mind terrorists are looking for easy targets. If they try the door and it appears locked because you wedged it with the door wedge, they may well just move on and find another door that doesn't appear to be locked. So that's a really good piece of kit to have with you. And finally, we've all got these, or most people have got these, a mobile phone. It doesn't have to be a smartphone. If you're going to go with the tell message, you need a mobile phone. And remember to have it on silent. That's important to do. No point in having your phone ringing. It's going to be a big giveaway. And then reflecting back on doors as well, is there a solid door that you can lock and hide silently behind in your ringing room? Now, by solid, I don't mean bulletproof. I mean solid that you can't see through. So just a wooden door that you can't see through. And if you can remain there behind the door wedged or locked and remain silent, that's a good thing to do. Somebody raised an alternative escape route. This is where I think it's really important. Have a look around to see what alternative exits you might have from the ringing room. Is it, for example, a doorway out onto a roof space, which is quite common? That's another place that you could hide. And with the added benefit, if it goes out onto a roof space, of attracting the attention of rescuers to let them know that you're there without alerting the intruders to the fact that you've done that. And also in relation to fire, of course, having an alternative escape route is important. Or if it doesn't get you out of the building, if it gets you out of the room onto the roof space where you can attract the attention of the fire service, that's also a good thing. Because if they know where you are, they will make a determined effort to rescue you from there. If they don't know you're there, they can't make that determined effort to rescue you. So it's a good thing to attract attention. Remember though to switch your mobile phones to silent if you're hiding. And I reflected briefly there on a solid door, which is solid from view. There are two things to remember with cover. There's cover from view and cover from fire, from firearm fire. Hiding behind something is good, but if it's not bulletproof, it's not going to save you if a bullet comes through it. A piece of wood won't do that. You'll be looking for something like a really solid piece of masonry. We could achieve that, or outside, a large earth mound, earth bank. One final thing I thought of again, just this morning really on this, was a code word. When people are hiding, witnesses have reported back that there's lots of people shouting mum or dad, and nobody can tell who it is that's shouting mum or dad. A friend of mine who lived in Paris at the time of all those terrible terrorist attacks in Paris, they had a code word agreed between their family. So that if they were all hiding in a dark room and they wanted to try and locate each other, they could use the code word. And it was something bizarre like broccoli, which somebody in the household notoriously didn't like to eat. And they all knew that if they heard the word broccoli, that that was one of their household and they were safe, or they could locate them by listening to where they were. And finally, on terrorism, if you decide that evacuation is not the right thing to do and you decide to evacuate, don't use the fire assembly point. The fire assembly point may just be another good secondary terrorist target. So a quick scoot through counterterrorism and run, hide, tell. There's lots of free guidance and training available on the internet, and these are 3 that I would recommend. The National Police Chief Council has got several videos and lots of information. The Counterterrorism Police has a free training site, which you can get a certificate at the end. And I know some employers are requiring their employees to do that terrorism training there. So that one in the middle, that's quite a useful one to do. And the bottom one, which is the MI5, all open source stuff. There's nothing secret about any of these. The MI5 site there has details about the threat levels. Now you might think that's not relevant, but actually it did directly affect bell ringers in, I think it was 2017, Steph will correct me, on the year that the threat level in the UK changed and went to the most serious level of critical, which means that a terrorist attack is imminent. It was Prime Minister Mrs. May who announced it the day before the masterclass in Birmingham. So we did give a little consideration to how that might affect us, and we were ready for it. We knew that we would see additional police resources in the city centre, particularly at transport hubs, which we did. And we knew that we might encounter some searches, which we did. At Birmingham Cathedral, there was a bag search there. So it's good to have those things in mind, and you may be required by your employer to do that middle one anyway. So that's a quick scoot through. Remember though, if you're not enjoying this, just blame Phil. There he is behind bars. Some would say that's where he belongs really. So we're going to have a quick scoot now at risk assessments. One thing that people often get confused on risk assessments is the difference between hazard and risk. So the hazard is something that could cause harm to people, whatever it is. And I've written on here chemicals, electricity, and working at height. You could add COVID-19 into that. That's the hazard. The risk is the chance, however large or small it might be, that the hazard will cause you harm. And when you do a risk assessment, you're assessing the risk of encountering the hazard. And your risk assessment leads you to think about mitigation measures that you could put in place to reduce the risk of encountering the hazard. And I think that's the easiest way I can explain it. I hope that makes sense. So usefully, ROSPA, the Royal Society for the Protection or Prevention of Accidents, give us 5 easy steps to remember about completing risk assessments. Identify the hazard. Decide who it is that might be harmed and how that harm might occur. Then you look at the risk and decide on control measures or mitigation measures that you want to put in place to protect people. And then record your findings and implement them. If there's an action for someone to take, make sure that person knows that they're required to take the action and let you know that they have completed the action. There's no point in writing down something for someone to do. They don't read it, they forget about it, it gets lost in their inbox. Make sure they know about it, make sure they tell you they've done it, or if they can't do it, you need to have that conversation as well and find out a reason they can't do it, have they run out of time, or can they not find a supplier of something? If you don't have a conversation, you won't know that the action hasn't been completed. And then finally, review your assessment and update it if necessary. That's really important. I did a risk assessment 2 days ago, and yesterday the government published some brand new guidance on places of worship and COVID-19. So I reviewed the risk assessment that I'd done. So thinking about risk and our risk assessment, there are 4 key things you can do with risk once you've identified it. And as an example, we're going to say that we've identified that the hazard that we've got on our example is that the steps up to the belfry door are very worn and they've become a hazard. So the 4 things that we can do, and this is the same with any risk that you identify. You can accept the risk, essentially take no action, carry on as normal, do nothing about the worn steps. This is essentially the fingers crossed option. You can avoid the risk altogether. You can change plans completely. And in our worn steps example, don't do any ringing. Nobody uses the steps. No one's going to encounter the hazard. The disadvantage clearly though is that you don't do any ringing. Thirdly, you can transfer the risk. Pass all of the risk onto somebody else. In our steps example, invite another team of ringers to do the bell ringing. You pass all the risk to the next team of bell ringers. The disadvantage, of course, is that you don't get to do any ringing at your tower, but the bells are rung. Now, we all use transfer. Anyone who's got an insurance policy, so car insurance, you transfer the financial risk involved in a car accident to your car insurance company. You've transferred that financial risk. And finally, the 4th thing you can do with risk is to mitigate. And this is where your risk assessment pays dividends. You take action to reduce the likelihood of risk of the threat. In our belfry steps example, the worn steps, so we could repair the steps. We could put out a warning sign to people to let them know that the steps are worn and they need to take extra care. Or you could put out a handrail or additional lighting or any combination of those things to mitigate the risk of encountering the threat. I hope that makes sense, but they're the 4 standard things that you can do with any risk that you've identified. Risk assessments. When I was starting to think about completing risk assessments for ringing, I did a scoot around the internet to see what I could find, and the Health and Safety Executive helpfully produced this recommended template. And this is the one that you will encounter with any of the gov.org websites. When you start looking at COVID, they will direct you to this template. And it's pretty straightforward, as you can see there. Risk assessments and templates have clearly become much more needed since COVID-19 as we look ahead and start to think about how we can return to ringing whilst minimising the risk of catching or spreading the virus. But it's important to remember that risk mitigation does not eliminate the risk. It only mitigates against the chance. There's still a chance that the risk will take place and you will encounter the threat. So thinking about COVID-19 and mitigating measures, I came up with a list really of things that may be generic measures that you could employ to mitigate against the risk of encountering COVID-19. And these may or may not apply to your tower. Each tower is different, but these are the sort of thinking that I think we could employ. Certainly identify a band in advance to reduce the numbers of people that might be allowed into your tower. No extra ringers for coming into the service, no standing behind, nobody sitting out. And visitors, no unplanned visitors. And that can be achieved by announcing it in the ringing world or locally on your websites or on Facebook. There's lots of stuff you can do around making sure that only the invited band come and ring. Only the key holder, for example, is the person that touches the doors. Have separate person identified for operating your spider. Have hand sanitizer available at the bottom of the stairs and in the ringing room. And only touch your own rope. ringing one bell only. Socially distance where possible. Staircases become crowded very often as you all wait behind the person who's trying to unlock the door at the top of the stairs. You're standing right behind the next person's legs that are right in front of you, and you're right under their face, which if they do cough, then the consequences could be serious. A pre-ringing briefing for bell ringers to identify who's doing what, so that there's not a gaggle outside the tower on a Sunday morning trying to work out who's going to do what. You all know what you're going to do before you get there. Identify who's going to pull up which bells, ideally pull up the bells that you're going to ring. These may not be ideal solutions, but at least it's starting to get us thinking about what we could do to help get ourselves back ringing again when we're legally allowed to do so. Have the minimum amount of personal baggage in the belfry or the ringing room. Maximise ventilation, open the windows, and make sure that everybody knows and everybody understands that if you have a ringer with a symptom, they should not, must not attend. And if they become ill while they're ringing, they must go home straight away. And other ringers must identify that they've been in contact with a person who's become ill whilst ringing. And it's important also that everybody is different. Everybody needs to recognise this. No ringer should be made to feel pressurised to go ringing if they don't want to, or cold-shouldered for declining to going to ring. That's absolutely not what we're here for. We must make sure that everybody has an understanding of their own appetite for risk. So a young, fit and healthy person, for example, might be quite prepared to encounter the virus because the impact on them, on the y-axis, might be negligible or insignificant. So their likelihood of encountering it, they might be quite prepared to accept they're going to encounter the risk because the effect on them is going to be negligible. So they might appear somewhere over here. But somebody who is perhaps over 70 or has an underlying health condition or is pregnant or any of the other vulnerabilities might decide that they have a really low appetite for risk. The impact on them could be significant or extensive. So therefore, they only really want to have a really low likelihood of encountering the threat. So they would rate themselves down here. They really don't want to encounter it because their risk, if they do encounter it, is going to be right up here. So some people might want to sit right down here, and that's completely understandable. None of us should be thinking that we're happy to go into the red zone, where we're almost certain to catch it, and it's going to have a significant impact. And because the significant impact of COVID is that it could kill you. 3 useful websites that I found talking about risk assessments, ROSPA, the Health and Safety Executive for that template, and the Central Council does have a risk assessment already outlined and details on how to complete it. That bottom link there should take you. And I think, Claire, I'm right in saying this PowerPoint can be made available on the Guild website for people to have a look at those links, copy them or photocopy them or however they want to cut and paste them.
Yeah, yes, it will be made available afterwards. Yeah.
And finally, I've just found 3 websites that I found have been really useful for thinking about COVID-19. The government site has lots of current stuff on there, including, and it's generic, not just for the belfry, staying safe outside your home. That's got some useful points on, really get people thinking about how they move around, particularly as society is starting to open up again. And the NHS, the current advice on health is clearly there. The World Health Organization, that's been quite revealing as well. And then yesterday afternoon, I was checking through this PowerPoint, and the government released yesterday some guidance for the safe use of places of worship. And it's the only time, the first time I've seen bell ringing get a specific mention on that bottom link there for COVID-19. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. They specifically say that bell ring gets a mention. The first time I've seen bell ringing get a mention, it's on that paper there. But they say it's still something that we can't do, and it's going to be subject to further guidance, but they don't give a date when that might come out. And then finally, it's important to remember that if you've not enjoyed this presentation, it is actually me that you need to blame, not Phil. So there we are. I hope that's been okay. And really, I was strong-armed into this. Arthur asked me to put it together after I sent him those basic ideas a couple of weeks ago. But encouragingly, if you feel that you've got something to add to the guild, whether you're an expert on beekeeping or anything else, then please do come forward. I know Arthur and Claire would be delighted to have you come along and do a presentation. Thank you, Claire.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you very much, Arthur, for strong-arming Jonathan into making his presentation, because actually I think that's it has been a really good presentation, really clear on all the areas that you touched on, really cleared up some things for me as well. So certainly with the risk assessment, I mean, explained by you, risk assessments look easy, if you ask me, and other things that, one thing that occurred to me as well when you were talking about tower security and how the door into the tower may not be secure, but you may be able to get into the church through the tower. That is actually something that happened at my own tower at Harborne many years ago, before they strengthened the door at the bottom of the tower and put two mortise locks on it. A church was broken into through the tower door, which was just a simple Yale lock, and then in the tower upstairs there are some leaded windows that go into the church behind the seat at the back, and it was a simple unscrewing of the bits that they weren't even sort of held in with putty or silicone or anything. They were just held in by battens that were screwed on. So they simply unscrewed that, took the window out without breaking it, and lowered themselves down into the church to break in. So lots of food for thought there. So we're having there's a few things in chat, all saying thank you and great presentation. So no more questions. So if we open up, if I unmute people so that people can start asking questions. Sorry. Yeah. So I'll just unmute people now.